Welcome back to the Shop Mini RC, everybody. I'm Ken, and today we are looking at this guy. Except it's this guy. The RX28SE from Reflex Racing. Now, this is one bad mamma jamma, and so we are super excited to get this built. We've got two different bodies for it. Make sure you guys subscribe so that you know when new videos go up. We've got an awesome viewership. Tons of watch hours. We're killing it in that regard, but like only 30% of our viewers are subscribed. So make sure you subscribe to stay up to date with all the recent stuff that we're doing. And don't forget, we do have a video kind of doing an overview before we actually received it. It was a release overview talking about the differences between the SE and the standard RX28. And you can check that video out over here. All that being said, let's dive into it. All right, well, here's all the stuff for this build. We're going to be using FureTech Hellfire 4500. This is going to be built for mod. And then the Cyclos. So it's going to be a sensored setup. Obviously going to be running the Reflex battery. We've got our Noble receiver from MXO Racing, our Reflex Servo. And then we've got the kit. This is the chassis. It's actually pretty slick. It looks like there's milling that you can see, but it's like super smooth. It's weird that you can kind of see the milling, but you can't feel it. And that's sick. We've got our rear pod. We've got our KISS front end, which we'll probably end up using on our stock car. And then we've got all of our carbon plates and rear pod plate and all that kind of stuff. The body mount, we won't be using that since we're going to be using a Lexan body. All of our hardware and ball joints, our shims for our caster. Wheels, the SE kit comes with 3 sets of wheels, your fronts, and then 2 sets of rears, both the 11s and the 14s. We got our front bumper. This is our center shock, as well as our side dampers. This is our double A-arm front end and shocks and axles. And then this is our diff kit that also has some axles in it, which I believe are for the KISS front end. I don't know why they're separate, but there they are. And then we've got 2 bodies to choose from. We've got both the Mako GT and the LMP3 body. I'm not sure which one we'll go with yet, but we're going to be using one of them for sure on this car. The other one will go maybe on another car, or maybe we'll do them both for this car. This will be our, if we do pan stuff, this will be if we do touring stuff. So, all right, guys. So first things first, we're going to build our motor pod. This motor pod is improved from the very first version, so that's awesome to see. So first thing we're going to do is just install this 3.5 millimeter ball stud. With all this stuff going metal into metal, we're going to use Loctite. So we just use some of the blue medium strength, and really it doesn't take much. You can just literally just do a tiny dab, just that, and it helps prevent it from backing out completely. So the ball stud goes in there. This is for the pivot. Remember, don't over tighten anything, just snug it up. You don't have to tighten much if you're using the Loctite, so that's a good reason to use Loctite. That way you're not going to strip anything or break any screws. Next thing we're going to do is make some ball studs, and it uses these tiny little M2x4s. That's the middle one, essentially. You have a tiny one, the middle one, the next one, and then this fat guy here. These are the 4s. You're going to need a 0.9 millimeter for them. Tight fit on our MIP there. And we'll just do the tiniest bit of Loctite. That is too much. We'll throw some on this guy. Okay. So the manual mentions doing these pivot balls with M4 set screws, but I'm pretty sure we need the M6s. The M4s don't seem to reach, so we're going to use the M6s because I'm pretty sure that's what it meant. Otherwise, it just does not reach through this right here, the shock mount, and into your rear pod. Good tip to make sure you're not cross-threading when you're going like aluminum into aluminum is set your screw in and back it out until you hear a click and the screw drop in, and then you can screw forward. Just for the newbies out there, or maybe somebody who just didn't think about that. All right. Again, no need to over tighten if we're lock tightening. Next thing we're going to do is throw our carbon pod on the bottom, or carbon plate on the rear or bottom of the pod. And that's going to use the M2x4s. This guy is a 1.3. And then our brass half, same thing. Alrighty. Next, we're going to go ahead and install our ball studs for our rear links. These little guys actually are also 1.3s. You want to make sure there's no play in these. We should be good. So that guy's done, and now we're going to do our chassis. We got the two link pivot balls there. That's the same thing. The tiny M2x3s. Oops. They're going to go into our pivot balls. Then we're just going to go ahead and throw our pivot in. That should be a Delrin sleeve right there. Yeah, it feels like it's kind of soft. And then install our links. Make sure you put the meld side down, and they should just pop straight on. Nice and easy. You got a little bit of slop in there, and you can take that out by adding in your M1.2 screws. Now you've got 4 of the longer ones and 6 of the shorter ones. I believe these are going to be for the double A arms, so we're going to use these longer ones. They're basically just enough to get through there and kind of pull them together. So we're going to use these guys. If for some reason we need them in the A arms, then we will pull them out and we'll put the shorter ones, but those short ones seem like they don't want to reach all the way through. They're like barely going to be getting their threading in on the other side, so we'll use the longer ones here. Also, I feel like with the new Delrin ball double A arms, you can tighten them more with the screw, like the Delrin ball and the screw versus these side screw type guys. Also, when you're tightening these, you want them you still want it to be loose. You still want it to fall. You just don't want it to have a ton of play in it, right? If you see a bunch of play in there, you can tighten it down just a little bit, but you don't want any binding. All right, so we'll get the rest in and then I'll show you. Got our screws in. We tightened them down just enough to where there's basically no play, but you want to make sure that, see, it almost feels like there's too much binding there. It's not just naturally falling down. So we might have to back it off just a tad. The issue is trying to figure out which one it's binding on. You can hold the links, right? And that seems a little tight. So we'll back it off just literally like a quarter turn. Let's check this side. Just like a quarter turn. Just a tad more here. I've got a half turn in there. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay, that's what you want to see. And you should still see no play when you pull it, right? When I pull it apart and go side to side here, go like this, there should be no play. But you want to be able to make sure it's loose. Okay. See, we're sticking. I think we're maybe a little too tight on this one. So just like quarter turn. Yeah, much better. Now I feel some play. Where'd that play come from? Huh? This one? All right. Guess we're tightening it back up just a eighth of a turn. And a little more. You can feel it. Like you can actually feel it, like almost clicking. Feels fine. You have just the tiniest amount. I don't even know if you can see it on camera, but there's just like the tiniest amount of play. Anyway, you want to eliminate as much as you can while not binding. All right, let's go ahead and do our tweak brace. Get that done. So on our tweak brace, you're basically going to screw in 2 of the M2x6s, and I'd say put them just basically halfway through, maybe a millimeter to a millimeter and a half, still exposed on your threaded side or your hex side, right? And then we're going to Loctite just a tiny bit on the ends of these, and that'll get us our perches, the spring perches Loctited to the screw, and then you adjust your tweak right here by screwing that in and out of the carbon. So again, just a little bit of Loctite on these guys. And then you just screw these guys up. And they don't need to be tight. Again, the idea is that you're going to be adjusting your tweak with the screw here, and that'll turn this in and out. Or you can adjust them here, but it's going to be spinning this screw. You're not going to be spinning these on the screw. You're going to be spinning the screw through the carbon in and out to adjust your tweak. And then we're going to go ahead and put an O-ring over our perch. Be careful not to lose these guys. All right, and then our tweak springs or side springs can just kind of be screwed on. You kind of thread them over the O-ring, and the O-ring will basically hold them on. See that? Ta-da! Now we're going to go ahead and use 2 of the button heads. These are M2x4s. And this guy will just go on here. Like so. Just a tad bit of Loctite. And then for our tweak brace pivot ball, you're going to use an M2x4, and you're going to put the pivot ball on top of that. Now we're going to go ahead and do our side dampeners. That's these guys. These little guys can be sometimes a real pain to get started in here. And if they are, that's why we've got our X-Acto. You can kind of ream it out just a little bit. I mean, just take off a tiny bit of plastic there, and that'll help you get it started. I don't think we're going to need that on this one. Oh, seems good. If you need to, you can use some just a needle nose or something. Just don't mar these up. You don't want to get them marred up, so just make sure you hold them nice and tight enough, but not too tight where you mar them. And actually, if you're worried about that, you can take like these guys, and you can hold them in the groove, because you don't care about the groove as much, right? The groove's not sliding. The groove actually is to hold the grease. And so marring up the groove isn't as big of a deal. So that's probably a better way to go about it. So you definitely want to make sure you thread them in as straight as you can. They're easy to thread kind of at an angle We should be good on that. It's just a little angled, but I think we're okay. Let's see how this one goes here. Starting by hand will help you make sure it's straight. Again, when it starts to get tight, then you can use the clippers. I'm sliding my fingers now so I can use the clippers. There we go. And the manual recommends Kyosho Blue 30K. We're going to use Atomic 35. You can just kind of dunk these guys in here. And just kind of work it in there. Alrighty. And you can pop those guys right here. You're probably going to want to do the shaft side. Also, keep an eye out on where the chamfering is. You have like a rounded side, and then you have a flat side that's going to be a little bit more chamfered. At least it looks to be. That's the chamfered side is the side you want to go down. The side that looks like it's going to go on the ball easier. And if you have an issue getting the ball on, or it feels stiff, which these feel pretty stiff, you're going to need to kind of work it. Here, let's go ahead and get this guy on here. And you can use a set of needle nose to kind of get in there and just kind of squeeze down on it just a little bit. Not too much. Make sure you don't slip, nothing like that. Just kind of squeeze it down on the pivot ball just a little, and that should help it loosen up. Again, you want this to fall nice and loose. And just keep kind of working it until it feels right. And I wouldn't squeeze it super hard all at once. Just slowly squeeze it. Just want to make sure it doesn't get so loose that it just easily pops off the pivot ball. We're going to do the other side, see where we get. And now we're going to go ahead and do the center shock mount. And that's this guy here. It's basically the same as the rear. They're identical. And I use 2 of the M2x4s. And then the pivot balls for the center shock, it's going to be 2 of the 3.5s. And you're going to want to put a 1mm shim. There's some shims that come with. There's even a thicker shim here. The 3 thin ones are all 1mm, so you can just snag up those and actually put the shim on before you Loctite. And then go ahead and put it in the frontmost here. And you can adjust this if you want to change the way your shock is set up. But per the manual, they've got it in both front mounts positions. All right. There we have that. Now you've got the center shaft. Go ahead and put your spring over. And you actually want to get a little bit of grease on here. So we'll put some more of the 35K. You can run 15K or the 30K they recommend. I'll just get a little bit on here. And we're going to work that through the body of the center shock. Then we have the droop adjustment collar, this guy here. And that slides onto the end of the shaft. You can use one of the smaller M2 set screws for that. Actually, I think you use the smallest M2 set screw. That's one of these little tiny guys here. When I say tiny, they are a tiny. Actually, we're going to put the tiniest bit of Loctite on there as well. just so it's got a little bit of resistance on it. Okay, and we'll adjust this later, obviously. Then you can pull your spring back and get your collar on there. Or clip. Spring retina. The manual mentions once you pop this guy on, again, make sure you check your chamfering. Just make sure you're nice and loose. Seems good. This also has a chamfered side here, so check for that. Make sure you're nice and loose. And then it mentions in the manual to basically set your shaft here in your adjustment collar, so you've got about 1.5 millimeters sticking out above the collar. It mentions it's a good starting point for center droop if the card's ride height is set so that the chassis and the pod are level with each other. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And then next you're going to install your body clip here with two M2x4s, but we're going to run Lexan, so we're not going to run that. And next will be our rear carrier for the axle. And that guy is going to go like so, and you're going to use time travel to the future. This is what happens when we do builds at 3 in the morning. We had our axle carrier run backwards. We had it like this. I don't know what we were thinking. It goes like this, guys. Like WTF. It actually, it goes like this, but we need to switch our axle. What a mess. I don't know how we missed that. Again, that's what happens when we do builds at 3 in the morning. So we're going to get this guy flipped around. You're going to see it backwards for the rest of the video until we get to where we figure it out, until we put our motor in and realize that, well, there's no way the pinion's going to reach. So, sorry. I needed more Red Bull. Back in time, because we're in the future now, so we're going to go back in time. All right, so next we're going to do our diff into our rear axle carrier. We got to build the diff. I already have a video on this when we did the first Reflex. If you want to check out the video over here, it used the chapters below to go to the diff where you'll see me build that diff. I don't want to show it again in this video. So we're going to go ahead and just get our diff together. And you can pause, open up in a new tab, go check out the other video, and come right back. Now, some things we didn't mention in that video that you may want to do is sand these down. Some people like to take a real fine sandpaper and just polish these up real nice. And then somebody else mentioned trying to take off a little bit of material on this guy here so that you could kind of tighten your diff down more without actually tightening it. But I don't know if we're going to do that. We never did that on our first diff, and it seems to be working just fine. But some people swear by it. Trying to take off a little bit extra material on these. But polishing these up probably will help. So consider doing that. Anyway, go watch that video, build your diff, come on back. So as I mentioned, some like to polish these up, some like to sand them down just a little bit using some finer grit, but just to get a little bit of grip, especially if you're running mod, if you want some more forward bite, you know, you're going to have to do that a little bit. We're going to just run it the way it is. Another thing of note, when you're breaking it in, don't over tighten your diff. Make sure that you are just enough pressure to get going, maybe run it a little bit and then tighten it back down. Get yourself a groove going. You want the bearings or the balls in the diff to kind of work a groove into there just a little bit, and then you can kind of tighten it down a little bit more, run it a little more, tighten it down a little more. You don't want to just straight tighten it off the bat because you can end up kind of ruining your thrust bearing. If you over tighten it and just run it straight in, you basically will cause a bunch of tension in the thrust bearing and damage it. And that's usually kind of the issue with a poor performing differential, is the thrust bearing kind of was over tightened and caused issues. So just kind of slowly break it in. You can always tighten it more if you want it to be tight, but don't just tighten it a ton right off the bat. Another little tip to get your diff balls into the spur gear, just dab a little bit of your diff grease we're using MRCS, Micro Syndicate. And just kind of pick them up with that. That way you're not sitting there trying to actually pick up each ball. And one last diff tip to get your E-clip in easily, just back off your your tightener here just a little bit, not too much, because you can only back it off so much, and then your bearing and stuff is hitting on the shaft lip anyway. But just make sure it's not over tightened and pushing up into where your little E-clip is going to go. So we're going to go ahead and install our bearings into our carrier, our axle carrier, and it's recommended to use just a tiny bit of glue on the outside race of the bearing or in the carrier itself, just to kind of take up some of the space and make sure you eliminate any kind of slop. So we'll use this safety pin and get just a little tiny bit. And we'll just touch it in there. We're going to touch this side, and then we're going to rub it in. Just kind of run it around. Same here. You don't want to put too much. You just want to kind of take up that space and make sure you remove any amount of like play in the bearing. If you feel like you got too much in there, you can always take like a toothpick. We're going to just kind of get it out and take some of it out. Because you just want a tiny bit. Okay. Go ahead and throw our bearing in. And I thought we lost a ball diff ball. They're all in there, but there's an extra. Got away from us. We didn't notice the extra, but they should all be in there. Yeah, looks like they're all in there. Alrighty. Go ahead and put your brass shim in. Slide that guy down. Run your shaft through. Put your other shim on. And then this guy here. And you're going to use this larger M2x3 set screw for that. And then again, just a tiny bit of Loctite on this guy. We didn't even open it. We just got some of the residual. Then make sure you line up that screw hole with the flat portion in the axle and screw it in. Give yourself just a tiny bit of play side to side. And remember, as you tighten this guy in, if you're going to tighten it in, as you break it in, you're going to get more play. So you're going to have to adjust this and get it tight again. And actually, we forgot to throw some bearing lube in there. We're going to use some of this MWX bearing lube. We really like it. We've used it before. Make sure you shake it up. It's been sitting for a while. It kind of separates just a little bit, look like. So make sure we shake it up good. And then we'll go ahead and apply some. So we're going to take this back off and add some lube. While we're here, I want to show you a little trick I do when I try to space the amount of play you have in the axle. I'm going to take this little 1mm shim that we have up here. You can use anything that's thin. You can use, as long as it's going to maintain the spacing there. The reason I want to do this is because I want to be able to press this hub all the way up against the bearing to make sure it's flat. Because with this hub only having one screw here, sometimes it has a tendency to kind of get canted sideways. And when that happens, your wheel will wobble. And so to get rid of the wheel wobble, we're going to try to push the carrier hub all the way up against the shim and the bearing that's in there. That way it's flat. And then we can take our little shim out of here on this side, and we're going to have still got a little bit of wobble. I mean, you can barely see it, but it's way better than it is sometimes. And you've got just enough play in there, just the tiniest bit of play. I kind of wish that these carrier hubs had screws on both sides. That way you could equally tighten it on both sides and it'll sit a little bit more flat. It just seems like all these ones that have only one kind of have a wobble to them. Our wheel's sitting flush, It's just, yeah. Maybe once we get the bearings in there, it'll be a little better. But definitely being able to push the hub all the way up against your bearing and your bushing or your spacer, and then have a little bit of tiny space on this side, because this is going to be even no matter what. And then you can tighten it down. Seems like a good way to do it. All right, so we're onto the servo now. We're going to be using the Reflex Racing RRE007, the 007. We're not going to need any of this, except for probably the servo horn screw, because it's got a proprietary servo horn. So let's get one of these screws out and save this stuff for another project. It's nice it comes with this little adapter as well. So if you want to use it in a different setup with a different receiver, full-size receiver, you've got that. So that's good. All right, so we're just going to go ahead and mount the servo posts. It looks like it's sort of centered, the hole for the post. The instructions say you want the posts flush with the top versus the bottom, so that's interesting. So we will go ahead and do that. There's only one way these posts will go properly according to the manual, and that is, again, you want them flush to the top. Okay, so there's gonna be a little bit of space at the bottom, but flush to the top. And then this hole, the mounting hole, is slightly offset, and you want it biased towards the front. So the offset should be towards the front of the servo. Try to get it so you can see that, but basically there's only one way these can go correctly. If you're not flush with the top, you're doing it wrong. And if you're not biased towards the front, the hole's kind of shifted towards the front just a tad, you're doing it wrong. So that's how it should look. All right, I'm going to go ahead and do our brace now. Again, we're Loctiting everything with just a little bit of thread locker. And it makes sense that these are flush to the top because it doesn't actually mount to the chassis. Oh, you know what? This is too long. Which screws do we need? Guess it's these little guys. Yeah, these little guys. So you're going to use the shorter guys here. And you may end up needing to use, we'll figure it out, we'll find out later. There are screws that come with the servo to mount the servo, so you might end up using those here. Let's go ahead and do that, actually. We're going to go ahead and do that, just because I'm not sure if these screws are accounted for in another part of the build. So we're going to use the screws that came with the servo. And they should be the same size. Again, I just want to make sure that we have all the screws we need later on in the build. We're going to go ahead and get this other screw in first. Then we'll swap these guys out. Now we'll use some more M2 set screws and our pivot balls to make the servo horn pivot balls. These guys go on this side. Okay. And the servo horn is aluminum, so you can use some thread locker on there. And that guy's going to go on here, just like so. It's a tight fit, but it will go. Now, I don't usually like to put the servo horn on until we are able to power up the servo, just so that we can have it centered. But I think we'll make an exception here just so we can show it as the build instructions show it. That should go on with a little bit of force. Don't get too crazy. Make sure you're lined up with your splines and whatnot, but should be good. Don't over tighten that, but just enough to snug it up. It's already got some Loctite or thread locker on there. And then we'll go ahead and throw it in the chassis. One thing I like about these Reflex servos is they have nice short servo cables, so you don't have to, resolder or cut or shorten or any of that. They're already pretty short, so that's nice. And then we use some more of the M2x4s, And remember, this servo brace is designed to slide forward and backward just a little bit. That way you can adjust, the geometry of your steering and whatnot. You do want to make sure it's even though, and the same on both sides. So go all the way forward or all the way back to start, and then you can adjust from there. And that'll change how aggressive your steering is, basically. So now we're going to go ahead and do our front end. The SE version comes with both the double A arm as well as the Keep It Simple Stupid KISS front end, right? We're going to use the double A arms on this guy, and then we're going to do a separate video for the KISS front end, and we'll install that on our stock car. We run a 2500 LiPo stock car, so we're going to try the KISS front end on that, but I do want to do the double A arm on here. We have a deep dive on the double A arm build in this video here. You can use the chapters to check that out and see how the front end is built. We're going to go ahead and try to keep this one a little shorter, and I'm just going to point out some of the differences when it comes to like the Delrin balls and the A-arms. But besides that, we're just going to go ahead and build it. And if you want a deeper dive, check out this video. So with the special edition kit, you get both different versions of the A-arms. You get the medium, which is the black, and then the dark gray or the hard. So the reason there's two different types of arms, or I guess hardnesses, is the harder arms are better for high bite conditions. So if you have like lots of traction on your track, the harder arms will help provide a sharper mid-corner steering, as well as reducing traction rolling a little bit. So if you're high traction, use the harder arms. If you're medium traction, you're going to want to use a little bit softer arms, and that's just kind of flex in the arm itself, right? So we're going to go with the harder arms, just because we do have kind of a higher traction track. And so we'll try it out. We'll see how they go. We've used the original softer arms on our stock car, but I think we're going to do the hard arms here. So we'll do that, and that's the darker grays. Another thing about these arms, both sets, is these are molded. They're not milled. The original RX28 came with milled arms, and then they were able to get some molded arms produced because of the success of the RX28, and now we have a better molded arm. But these are all molded. Also, the original arms used a pivot ball system, whereas these used the Delrin ball and a screw. A lot of people seem to prefer the Delrin ball and the screw. We'll talk about that in a minute. Now, as with any build, not just this build, but even crawlers or airplanes or any sort of build, when you're doing the build, you always want to check your tolerances and check for binding along the way, because as you get more pieces to the puzzle, it becomes difficult to find out where binding is. So if you have your double A-arm suspension, your lower arms, your upper arms, and your shocks, and even if you wait till the whole car's built and you've got your tie rods on there, you have a lot of points where you can bind. You can bind here, you can bind here, you can bind to your top A-arm, its ball, your steering links, your shock joints. I mean, there's a lot of places where there could be just one of those spots binding. And if one of those spots is binding, you're going to have issues, especially if it's an unbalanced bind and whatever. So as you're building, it's just so much easier to just make sure everything is nice and floppy as you're building, right? Like it should just move, right? You don't want a ton of play. There should be really minimal play. But there should be no binding. And just, again, check each piece as you go. It'll save you a lot of headache later if you end up with some binding somewhere. If any of this does bind, you can always just kind of shave your A-arm on the inner down, just take a little bit of sandpaper, just a little, and test fit and sand and test fit until you've got no binding, right? We didn't have to do anything here. These are perfect. They go. There is no problem with these. So I am digging that. They stick when you get up this far because they're never going to get that high, and because this is angled, so it tightens up as you get higher. But yeah, these things, no play. I can't say no play. There's the tiniest bit, but they're perfect. So super awesome. I just wanted to point that out though. Check your binding along the way. So we were looking at this earlier, and I noticed it, and I didn't say anything in the video, and maybe I should have. In hindsight, I should have. The kit that I can find only comes with 3 1mm shims, and then it looks like a 2mm shim, these little plastic shims, and we used them here and here. But now we need 2 1mm shims for our Delrin balls and our A-arms here. The lower A-arms want you to do a shim above the Delrin ball into the steering knuckle. And I noticed in the instruction photo that it looked like this upper shim was actually much thicker than 1mm, but the instructions say they're both 1mm. So I used the two 1mm, and in hindsight, I think this rear one needs to be the 2, or if you don't like the amount of angle it gives, put that 2mm up here in the front, and that'll help flatten your spring. I think that's just a matter of how you kind of want to set that up. But the instructions, when you look at the photo, you can see that this upper mount is a much higher shim. So we're going to pop that off and swap it over. Kind of annoying, to be honest. It would be nice if you just included an extra 1mm shim. That way you could have it a little lower here, or mention that it's the 2mm. Either way. Man, you don't get a lot of threading with this 2mm shim, do you? I don't even know if that's correct. I mean, it looks big on the, like I said, in the photo on the instruction manual. So we'll see. So when you're putting in your Delrin balls here, be aware that these A-arms, they're not mirrored in production. They're actually the exact same. So one side is more chamfered than the other. And then obviously on the other side, because it's not mirrored, the opposite side is going to be chamfered. So in this side, we push the ball up through the bottom. And on this side, we push the ball down in through the top. Okay. And they should go in very easily. And you can see there's no binding. They're nice and fluid in there. They move very easily. I'm barely touching it. And it flops around. Again, checking as you go. Now, if you need a little bit more room, so on this one, this side was chamfered, so it came up in through the bottom, which means that this ball doesn't have quite the freedom of movement, right? It's still loose in there, but it can't move side to side, forward, back. Because the Delrin ball has like a lip on it, right? It's got this little post, and that little post needs freedom to move around inside the A-arm hole. So one thing you can do, let's pop this guy back out. Use your 1.5 and you can just kind of pop this guy out. There we go. So you can take a super sharp X-Acto, and again, we went in through the bottom here, meaning that the top was harder to push through because it's chamfered on the bottom. So this side has plenty of freedom of movement. You can see that very well, and this side doesn't. So you can just kind of take a blade and just barely take off a little bit. Another thing you can use is a body reamer. And again, you're just taking off the smallest amount. So we're going to go ahead and stick this guy in there, and we're just going to take off just a little. And you're just trying to get it so that that post on the Delrin ball will freely move. We're going to stick it in through the bottom here. And then check our movement. And we have better movement now. Not a lot, but we do have better movement. Okay, and you can take off more if you'd like. I think we're going to. It seems like it's trimming more in here because it's catching on the edge, so it's trimming more in here. We really want to get a little bit out here, so we'll just take a little bit off. Again, not much, just enough to let it pivot in there. All right, that should be better. There we go, much better. So now we have a lot of freedom of movement in there. And that's what you want. And like I said, this side didn't need it because this is the chamfered side. It would be nice if they were able to mold mirrored A-arms, but that would be expensive to do another mold. Maybe in the future, maybe in future offerings, they can do that. But right now you just kind of have to get in there and manually do it. You can really see the amount of freedom of movement you have once you've got your screws in there. This side is definitely a little more loose than this side. But I don't think that the arms are going to move as much as we've already got it, so I think we're good. And it's loose within that range, and that's what matters. Okay. We might need to do a little forward and back here. our forward and back seems a little tighter. Our side to side seems good, right? But our forward to back, it's a little much. So we'll just, we'll work at it a little more. And again, you just want to get it nice and free. Actually, there was just a little piece stuck in there. That seems better. Yeah, we're good. We're good. And remember, you're going to be able to tighten this ball cup up anyway with the screws that go in right here. Right, you've got some screws that go in here, and that'll tighten up your Delrin balls as well. So don't be too afraid to have them a little loose. Again, you just don't want them popping out of the cups. And again, once you get the steering knuckles in there and you're tightening down your screw through the pivot ball, it's going to expand the pivot ball if you over tighten it. Tighten it up just enough to get rid of any sort of up and down movement as much as possible. If you notice it's starting to bind and you don't have that freedom of movement anymore, back it out just a little bit. And you're definitely going to Loctite this screw into the knuckle. But you want minimal play up and down with maximum amount of articulation. Okay? Freedom of movement, baby. And this seems good. Everything's nice and floppy and things just kind of move. This one seems a little tight. Oh, no. Yeah, maybe a little. We'll see. We'll work it in. If we have to. Again, this is the one where we have to clear out the top. So we cleared it out. Maybe we need a little more. Again, I think it's going to work itself in. And we should be good. And again, it's not going to be moving as much as we're moving it, right? Like there's just a little bit of travel in there. So anyway. So we've also got these shims. They're used to adjust the caster on your front end. And they basically just go here on the, I'm not going to put it in the right spot, but right there on the inside of the A-arms. And it's on the back side of the car. And it basically gives you the ability to adjust, 4 degrees of caster, 2 degrees of caster. Basically, there's a 0.4 shim you can put in the back and have 4 degrees. And then if you use 2 of the 2 millimeter shims, 1 on each side, you'll end up with 2 degrees of caster. So this is going to just kind of be your personal preference on how you want to put your shims. But basically, you're trying to shim it. You're going to need to shim it 4 total. So 4 on one side, 4 on the other side, or 2 on each side. Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of play. So just be aware of that. And then you're going to go ahead and put in your shock tower, and it uses M2x6 longer screws. And again, just make sure everything falls and flows, right? Like, I mean, we're holding it this way, so it's not totally on the gravity, but there you go. So everything's moving nice. And your knuckles move nice and free. Loose is good, as long as there's no slop. Now onto the shocks. You're going to use the Delrin balls here as well. Go ahead and thread your collar on. When you put your Delrin balls in, I would recommend pushing them in with the, I don't know what you want to call this, but the lip side. On your Delrin ball, you have kind of a lip side. Make sure the lip side is towards the chamfered side. So when you push it in from that flat side into your shock housing. All right. That will mean that your lip here on your Delrin ball has more freedom of movement. You don't want it to go the other way, and then you've got a chamfer the outside. So go in, and that should be the chamfered side on the side of the Delrin ball lip. Okay. And again, these you're going to want to make sure have plenty of freedom of movement. Now, you could try to do the little trick where you squeeze the shock housing eyelet, but it's probably not going to do much here because the Delrin ball will just squeeze. So if you find that you've got too much resistance, you're going to have to figure out a different way to do it. You can try to, again, chamfer it out a little bit more. You can try to stick a metal pivot ball in there and squeeze down just a little bit to help kind of flatten the eyelet so that you get a little bit more movement. But again, the key here is freedom of movement without slop. Okay, so once you've got that together, you can go ahead and throw your spring on, and then your other half of your shock goes in there. You're going to want to use some dampening grease on there. Basically 30K, or what we have is 35, so we're going to use some 35. One thing that I've seen some people do, and we actually did it on our other car, is you sand down the inner shaft just a little bit, or trim it down just a little. There's kind of 2 notches. Should have done it before we greased it up. There's 2 little notches there. I've seen people go all the way down to the first notch. We just take a little bit off. That way we've got a little bit more travel and compression, just a little. if you're bottoming out, it looks like these ones actually will bottom all the way out to the housing here. Maybe it was the older shocks. Let's take the spring off and look real quick. So you can see there's like maybe a 0.5 millimeter where you could actually compress just a little more, and then your shock won't bottom out on the shaft, but instead on the spring or on the housing. So if you're concerned about that, just take a little sandpaper to this and trim it down a little bit. I think these ones are better than the first set that we got. The first set we got would like stop like right there. So trimming them down let us get more compression out of it. Effectively more travel, so that was good. We're going to try like this for now. Once you've got the screws going through the Delrin ball and through the shock housing eyelets, then you can maybe try the the pliers squeezing trick. I would be very, very careful though. You don't want to crack the eyelets. They seem fine. We've got plenty of freedom of travel here, so you probably don't have to. Again, just kind of feel them and see if they seem too tight. There's a couple different ways you could get rid of that binding, but you definitely want to make sure there's no binding. Nice and free. All right, we're going to install our axles next, and then our ball studs for our steering knuckles, and then we'll throw it in the chassis. All right, we got our front end all together. Now we can just go ahead and throw in our 3 M4 screws, the countersunks. And yeah, we're getting close to electronics. I just got to say, the fit and finish on this guy is second to none. It just snaps right in there, the front end. It's got 2 little guide pins. It fits perfect. Everything just seems to fit really well with this. There's a lot of good small little updates that add up. It all adds up. Are just improvements from the very first version. So pretty sweet. I mean, everything feels smooth. There was a lot less trying to fit things and trimming things. The first version, you had to do a lot of work on the A-arms. These A-arms are so much easier. I do like the screw axles where you have the screw that it's a counter threaded axle, and you put basically a button head screw in versus a nut on the axle. So I think they're titanium. I think it has some aluminum and titaniums. We'll probably at some point get the titaniums. We have those on our stock car, but the countersunk screw is super nice. Or not countersunk, but the counter threaded axles with the button head screw are super nice. Basically, it removes a lot of shaft so that you don't have any kind of shaft even remotely possible of sticking out of your wheel. So yeah, and they seem to hold better than the nuts. So I don't know. I just like them. You still have to use nuts on the rear though. But yeah, we're gonna go ahead and get our tie rods done and get our electronics in. While trying to put together these tie rods, if you're having trouble getting it to start the threading, well, you can just chamfer a little bit of an edge around it, and it should help you. They're not too bad, but they're kind of hard to get started. Again, test as you go. See if you've got binding. Make sure you're nice and loose. This guy is pretty good. Try to make sure when you do your tie rods, there's these markings here. That's to show you which side, because the threading is opposite, right? So that way you can just crank on the center and bring them in or bring them out, both sides. So just put them both on the same side when you put them in. That way you can turn them both the same direction to bring them in and push them out. I'm going to go ahead and pop this side back off and then do this side and test to make sure there's no binding on this side. And there is. So we know we need to loosen that up. Again, you want to test each pivot point, each ball joint. Otherwise, you're not going to know where that binding is. You just kind of want to work it until it loosens up. And there we go. Now we're nice and loose. Just kind of hangs. Okay. Looks like our top ball joint there's a little loose, so we're gonna tighten that up. We've opted out of using these front screws or these extra screws that go in the A-arms to tighten it up. We might throw them in, but I'm hoping we won't need them, at least for a while. We can just use the, well, that plays in here. Maybe we can add another shim in there. We'll see. We'll see where we're at. You want to set your tie rods here so that you have a little bit of toe out. Again, it's going to all be track and personal and driver preference. But just to baseline, make sure you got a little bit of toe out. You can measure them to make sure they're equal as well. See, it looks like we have got, we'll do center to center. We are at basically 20 millimeters and 20 millimeters. We're right on the money there. We can check our middle here just to see. Looks like it's at 8.3. This side looks like it's maybe just a tad shorter. But again, that could be differences in the manufacturing tolerances of the actual eyelets, these ball joint ends. So that's why I like to measure from the actual kind of center to center of the pivot balls. 20.5. Yeah, no. Yeah, it's like right at 20 there. This guy is pretty much the exact same. So yeah, we're good as that for a starting point, and we can adjust it as we get it out on the track. So before we get into the electronics here, I just want to show you, we did go ahead and add our screws in just because I didn't want to do it later and lose them or whatever. Not that we're going to lose them, but I just figured I'd put them in. That way we could adjust them on the fly if we wanted to. We also added a 0.2 millimeter shim to the back here. So now we've got 0.4 here and 0.2 here. The reason was we had a lot of play in the A-arms. Everything else is super tight, but for some reason these upper A-arms just had a little bit of play in them, more than we'd like. We still have tons of freedom of movement here. And yeah, we used the 2.2s because they were actually thinner than the 0.4. This was like 0.46 or something like that, 0.45 maybe even. Actually, let's look. I'm curious. I forget what it was now, but we can look. Make sure we zero this out. And 0.46. Let's check it back here. 0.46, almost 0.47 it looks like. Whereas these two guys together were thinner. They're 0.40, 0.4. Hold on, let's get this in here good. So yeah, it looks like about 0.43, 0.42. So they were slightly thinner. We didn't want too much tightness in there, so we opted to go with the 2 shims and then the one in the front. And there's still a little play in there. You can see it. And that's play in the A-arm for sure. But better than it was and still super smooth. So just wanted to show that. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to electronics and the motor. We don't have our pinion yet, actually. I'm not sure. We'll get that when we go to the shop to race. We'll throw our pinion in there. I got to kind of ask around to figure out what the best pinion I should run is for a 4500. Again, I'm new to mod, so we're gonna try to keep it a little slow, a little manageable. And then we can always up it later and put a 5500 or a bigger pinion. All right, we're gonna get this motor in and we're gonna figure out our electronics layout. So I'm thinking we're gonna do the ESC on this side. Let's see, where's our battery? Let's see how much space our battery takes up. Okay. You know something I noticed? These battery holders, the battery rubber band holders here that are built into the chassis, which are pretty sweet, they are very close to our links. Now, I don't think the car is actually going to hit, but they are super close to the links. But we probably have enough here. It shouldn't need to move that much. I think you're probably not going to really hit, but just be aware. If you feel like there's something kind of going on there, maybe it's that. And you can always take your links and just kind of sand it down just a little bit on the inside there, just to give yourself a little bit extra clearance. But I think you're fine. Probably pointing out something that is irrelevant, but I think you're good. So anyway, all right. So we're going to do our battery here. Probably just going to run this guy here. You know what? I think I'm going to move. So we're not sure how we want to set our Ackerman yet. So we're going to slide our servo back, well, forward, and see how much room we can kind of get. Well, it's not a lot. I just wanted to see if we get a little bit more room to fit the ESC. Man, that's tight. I'm not sure the best way to do this right now. Let's see. We could probably tuck. Man, it doesn't want to tuck in there either. it does not want to fit any which way. All right, let us, we're going to mess around a little bit. We'll come back, figure out the best way, and then we'll show you.
A few moments later.
All right, so we ended up decasing it. That's going to help us fit it in quite a bit better. We can probably resolder these motor wires to get a little bit more clearance on the battery, facing them basically straight up, but I think this will be fine. We've got our double-sided sticky tape in there. Slide this forward. We also have our servo all the way back, so our Ackerman is set all the way to the back. That gives us the ability to adjust it. We can move it forward. I just wanted to make sure that we had that clearance. Power button's right underneath that, but that's okay. So we should be good there. I'm going to move it to the outside as much as I can. And then our receiver, we could decase that and maybe fit it down in there, essentially, but I don't know. It's pretty tight, and I'd rather not decase it. I have a lot of brownout issues, it seems like. We have high static here in Colorado. So we basically, I think leaving it in the case might help. So I'm just going to mount it on the side like this. It's not too heavy, so it's not like it's really raising my center of gravity. And yeah, we have our bind button we'll have access to still, right behind the servo, essentially. Just be able to get in there and hit the button. So I think that's what we're going to do there. We're going to get it all taped in. So we've got our channel 2 wire here from our ESC to our receiver. We're just kind of wrapping it around this Allen. And you can use a screwdriver or whatever. You can also get a hairdryer or a heat gun and just kind of heat this up just a little bit, and it'll really hold its shape a lot better. Just make sure when you're doing it, you don't pull too hard on the plugs. I'm really trying to avoid pulling on the plugs. I'm just trying to tighten it in the center area. And that'll help it kind of stay nice and clean, because we're only going from here to here, so we don't need too much. And really kind of like that look. Actually, let's go this side. Yeah. So we'll go like that. We'll go under our power, because our power is going to be most used, most commonly pulled on. And then this guy can go like this. Sure, our servo wires are kind of out of the way here. All right. So the one thing we're going to have to do is get a transponder set up. So we might have to end up pulling this guy back out, actually, so that we can solder our transponder wires. Oof, that's okay. Let's go ahead and get our motor soldered up, and then we'll get to the transponder. Do we want to go under? I don't think we do. I think we just want to come over the top here, actually. Just like this. No reason to go under. Why do we need that? All right, and then we got our sensor wire too. Okay, so let's get some of this out of the way. Got this mess going on. This is the right one? Yeah. Time to solder. We'll go ahead and clean up our mess here. We love to have this stack of magnets, because when we drop stuff on the floor or we want to clean up a bunch of screws, it's as easy as that. You just pick them all up. You don't have to. Tiny screws are sometimes a pain to pick up, so this will get them in there fairly easily. All right, got our motor wires nice and soldered in. Now we're just going to go ahead and add our transponder. Pulled our servo out to make it a little easier. All right, hoping this is a good transponder. We've got a couple bad transponders, so I'm hoping this one's not one of them. But we'll solder the wire in, and then worst case we can just plug it into a different transponder. All right, we got our Bluetooth on there so we can set our throttle endpoints and adjust our stuff. Motor's working, steering's working. Got our transponder in there. Everything seems good. So now we just need to get some wheels and tires and our bumper and body on. And there we have it. We've got some KSM mediums, low profiles on the front, Marka 5s, the treadeds on the rear. We're going to run the 14s in the back, the 8.5s in the front. Basically in mod, you want to have your 14s on the back. I've heard some people trying to run the 11s on the front, but with how wide this car sits in the front, I don't know if you really want to run the 11s. I talked to a couple people. They recommended just run the 8.5s. The 11s will give you just way too much steering, and also they're going to act differently because of how wide the front is. So they said even in mod, a lot of those guys that are running real fast, they're running the 8.5s in the front, 14s in the rear. If you're going to run it in super stock or stock, then you got to run the 11s in the rear. We've also got our LMP3 body, nice and chopped. Got to get this guy painted up, and yeah, we'll see how she does. I really dig this body. It's super cool. We still have the Mako to do, so that's a pretty slick looking body as well. So we'll get that guy mounted up as well. All right. So something else I wanted to show, we put our whole front end together and it seemed like we were very free of binding. But then once we installed the front end on the car and tried to drive it around just a little bit, we noticed that the kingpins seemed very tight. That's what we finally narrowed it down to. So we backed the kingpins off just a little bit here, and it totally freed up the suspension. If you put the kingpins all the way in, I'm calling them kingpins because they're threaded on this end and not down or in the shaft, but whatever, the lower A-arm pins, they'll be fine. You can go all the way in and you have, plenty of freedom of movement even there. But this shaft is just barely above this plate here. It just barely sticks above. And so once you install your bumper, that's when you start to get binding. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and show you. So right now, you can see they just drop. This one just drops. We've got our spring still on this side. So this side just totally free to move. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and install my bumper. And again, we're not over tightening the bumper at all. We're just normal amount of tightness. You don't want them popping out while you're racing, right? So just snug, not crazy tight. And then look at that. It doesn't want to move at all. We can back it off a little more. But again, backing off the bumper, you're just asking. I mean, you're going to Loctite it, back it off, and then you get a little bit more loose. But that's the issue. So everything was free. We put the bumper on. We thought we were good to go. The bumper caused binding in our suspension. So you can do a couple things. Like I said, we backed out the kingpins a little bit, and it made it much better. But ideally, you don't want to have to back them out. You want them to sit in there. From a durability standpoint, you want them in the bulkhead here. Okay. So what you can do is on your bumper, just where that sits, you can just take it down just a little bit. And you can actually see there's marks on this bumper. I don't know if you can see it. See that? There's marks from the kingpins rubbing on it. So you can just take an X-Acto or a file or something and just try to notch it out just a little bit. And it should help quite a bit. You can take a Dremel to it too if you really wanted to, but I'm just going to notch this guy out just a tad. It doesn't take much. Just that little bit. That should be enough. All right, there we go. So, and we'll just go ahead and do the other side as well. Notch that out, and that should help free up both sides. And there you go. That little bit there will help a ton. Fully installed, both sides, super free to move. Basically falling under its own weight. It's exactly what you want to see. Nice. Another thing we're doing is I wasn't really happy with how much we're riding pretty low, and I didn't like how little travel we had in the shock. Full compression, we were still at full compression. You can see it doesn't really, you probably don't need to go much further, but I like to make sure that we've got full freedom of movement. I don't want any hard stop in the shock. Maybe some do, but I think ideally we want a little bit more travel there. So I mentioned it earlier, but we just basically took off. We sanded it down just a little bit, not even all the way down to the first notch. There's 2 notches in there kind of to help hold maybe old grease in there, I don't know. But we took it down almost to the first notch, and then we took off just a little bit on this, just some sanding it, using some 600 grit sandpaper, just sand it down just a little bit. Give it a little bit more compression. And yeah, let me pull the other shock off and I'll show you. So I don't know if you're gonna be able to see here, but you get maybe, you know, 0.5 millimeter. It's kind of hard to tell, but there you go. There you go. Okay. I can actually measure it for us. I'll just do the whole shock body, not eye to eye. We'll just do the whole shock. So the new one is 18.2. The original, we're at 18.7. So yeah, basically we took off half a millimeter. Yeah, a little more than 0.5 millimeter, barely. Basically 0.5 millimeter. Perfect. And that just helps prevent your shock from bottoming out if you ride lower. Another thing that I really like about having that extra travel in the shock, or having a shorter shock shaft essentially, is that when you put your grease in your shock, your dampening grease, if it's fully compressing and you're bottoming out completely and your piston is hitting it inside the shock housing, you're just pushing the grease out the top. You can see when I fully compress, it's just pushing the grease out the top. And if it is totally bottoming out, even when it's, you don't have a lot of travel, you're gonna be pushing that grease out, and you're gonna have to constantly, you're losing that dampening fluid over time. So I feel like having that extra little bit of space in there, that little tiny bit of extra space, means that you've got a little bit extra dampening fluid in there, dampening grease, that it'll last a little longer. I feel like it's going to make it a little easier on maintenance maybe. Again, if you're super serious, you're probably rebuilding your shocks every race anyway, or every race night, depending on what kind of race you're at. But if not, that little bit of extra space will be nice. And so, yeah, our front end is much, much freer now. We have a lot more room for travel. So I'm a lot more happy with it, with the two little modifications, one to the bumper and then shortening up our shocks. All right, guys, we're out at the track. We're testing the car, running it. We had a small issue. If you notice, this is not the FuryTech. We had so when we put in this ESC, we basically didn't resolder it. We just kind of bent the motor wires up to fit behind the battery or in front of the battery. And so when I bent them up, apparently I weakened one of them and it popped off. Now it wasn't touching anything. It just was running with only 2 wires, and it caused it to overheat, and it basically fried it. So we tried to open it up and see if there was something, maybe it was just bearings or something, but it fried it. So we went ahead and snagged this guy here at the shop. This is a 5500, so we're going to run it with that for a little bit, and then we'll do a separate video talking about the FuryTech, and we'll show that because we're getting another FuryTech 4500, and after we run it for a couple weeks or months, we'll do a full update on the car and the FuryTech motor and the ESC. We're loving the ESC. This is the Cyclos. We did have to decase it. Here's the body. We're going to run the LMP3. It's our first time doing a 3-tone V's liquid mask for the first time as well, so I don't know, it's kind of busy, but we like how it came out. Pretty decent, I think. Anyway, so far it seems like it's running okay. We just put our first pack through it. We still need to break in our tires. We probably should true these, but they're the low profiles, and everybody says you don't really need to true them. But at this level, you probably, on mod, running as fast as you're running, you need everything to be as precise as possible. We're just going to run it till they break in for now. Again, we're not actually running any races, at least not right now. Maybe next week. I don't know. Maybe we'll enter tonight if they have like a B class or a B sort, because we'll be in that for sure.
More moments later.
All right, so we just ran it in our practice. We have a dedicated mod practice. There was a ton of us out there, and it ran super well. Again, it drives better than I do for sure. So this is definitely more motor than I need right now. So I turned down my throttle to 90%, give myself like 10%, negative 10% expo, just a little bit, just to help make it a little bit more manageable for me. But it sticks. It is crazy how well it sticks. I mean, all the low CG chassis are really good. They all stick really well, but like there's something about this that's just like, I don't know, it's smooth, it drives flat. I definitely have some tuning to do, and that's something I'm learning, but yeah, I mean, tires still need broken a little bit, but I'm liking it.
everybody next Thursday down in Colorado Springs, or next Friday right here. I definitely like the extra weight of this chassis. I think cotton on it.
You hit that brake and it's like...
It's a 5500 with a 12 tooth. So it's also geared a little high, I think. Yeah, I just need to fix the motor ESC issues, and then I think we're good.
It's turning too much to the left.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this video on the Reflex Racing RX28. We are liking this car and this chassis quite a bit. This tub chassis, you know, the steel milled tub chassis is the only one on the market like it. It helps you get your center of gravity real low, all your electronics real low, which is really awesome. It's very rigid. I like that a lot. We talked about a lot of this in the other video. I'll put a link over here. When this was first revealed, we kind of went over all the details of this versus the regular RX28. And yeah, we even show in that video just kind of the price breakdown a little bit, where if you're looking to get both sets of front A-arms on the double A-arm suspension, you know, the hard and the soft, as well as a KISS front end, it's priced well, right? It's right at where it needs to be. And depending on how much this chassis, the actual chassis plate itself is going to cost, like if you're trying to upgrade a regular RX28 to the SE, you would need other parts more than just the chassis. But the chassis itself, you know, it's a more expensive part. So depending on how that is priced, it could be a real good deal just to buy the SE as a full, you know, as a kit, the $500 kit. So again, this car is not necessarily for everybody. You know, it seems like a high price point for a lot of people that are newer to the hobby, but for anybody looking to basically be part of that top 10%, the advantages this chassis brings, that's something that those type of racers can take advantage of. So it's really for them. I'll be honest, it's not even really for me. I'm not quite there yet, but I am loving the car. It handles so well. And it's, you know, if you've got experience with the other RX28s, it's the same as far as the AA arm is concerned for tuning and whatnot, but it's just a clean design. I just really like the Reflex design. I know some people like to switch over their dampers here to shocks. You know, they use side shocks from GL and whatnot, or you can change out your front shocks, things of that nature. But overall, the platform itself, I mean, it's got so much tunability. And again, if that's too much tunability for you, use the KISS front end, which a lot of people also seem to be absolutely loving. We haven't tried it yet. We are going to do a video showing the KISS front end, so make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you know when that video goes up. But we're going to take that KISS front end and we're going to throw it on our stock car. We run a 2500 LiPo stock car, and we're going to use the KISS front end on that. So again, just wrapping it all up, we are really digging this car. We're really digging the chassis. Since we ran this body, definitely dig the body. The body is super slick. It feels good. Again, some of the guys that are the fast guys, they can really tell the difference between bodies. I know a lot of those guys do like this body. It just depends on the car and the track and the driver and how they like it. But there's a good number that are digging this body, and I think it's just cool looking. So anyway, I just can't say enough good things about it. There's too many awesome points to point out again and again. You can watch the video that we already did just talking about the differences between the three basic setups of the Reflex cars now. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed everything. Make sure you guys like, subscribe, share, hit that notification bell. We've got tons of videos coming. We've got crawler videos, buggy videos, more Mini Z and 128 scale videos, and some other kind of cool stuff coming along the way as well. And we're trying to hit that goal of 10,000 subscribers. I noticed that like 70% of my watch hours, which are very good, are from non-subscribers. So I know a lot of you guys are watching. I see the stats. You just need to hit that subscribe button. It's just a click for you, but it means the world to me. So I really appreciate it. Anyway, guys, get out there, build something awesome, smash them, crash them, and bash them, but don't break the expensive parts.